Oi, gente. Hoje eu tenho uma grande atração para vocês, uma entrevista com um cara super importante, ninguém menos que Dana Colley. O Dana Colley é um grande saxofonista, fundador de uma das bandas seminais dos anos 90. Estou falando do Morphine. O Dana e sua nova banda, Vapors of Morphine, nem tão nova assim, né? Mas é uma banda que continua o legado do Morphine, vai se apresentar em São Paulo, show único, dia 14 de fevereiro no Cine Joia. Você pode comprar os ingressos aqui embaixo no QR Code. Galera, vale muito a pena. O show é sensacional, eles tocam clássicos do Morphine e também músicas mais recentes. É muito, muito legal. Eu adorei fazer a entrevista com o Dana. Ele falou da história da banda, falou do relacionamento dele com o Mark Sandman, saudoso Mark Sandman do Morphine, falou bastante do Brasil e antecipou como será esse show de 14 de fevereiro. Aí vai minha entrevista com Dana Colley. So Dana, thank you very much for doing this. I'd like to start by asking about your memories of your last time in Brazil.
Well, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, 10
It
years.
feels like a long time ago. 10 years. I mean, the last time we were there with Billy Conway,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. And he and Jerome were playing drums. And I just remember doing a street festival.
Yes, in
And
Pinheiros,
then
yeah.
we stayed up until the sun came up and walked down the street with other people and the people sweeping up, and people would come up and just give us big hugs and said that we loved the show, and it was a beautiful time for us, for sure. One of my favorite moments.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, it's incredible the connection the Brazilian audience has with your music. It always has been since the 90s.
I think Mark had a lot to do with that. His
Hmm.
use of Portuguese, his knowledge of speaking Portuguese was one of his favorite languages to study, and I think although Morphy never got to Brazil, he had been here on his own before the band was formed and studied, and was very fond of the culture and of the country and music, of course, and the food. And so he would always talk about Brazil to us, and we had yet to get there as a
Yes,
band.
yes. Was he in
So
Brazil for long, do you know?
I'm not sure how long it was exactly, but must have been a year, if not more, at least, I
Hmm.
think.
Very cool, very cool. And let me ask you, I'm very curious about the Boston music scene of the 80s. Can you tell me a little bit about how it was? I mean, you guys, it was such an eclectic scene, wasn't it? I mean, you had all these different bands like Lemonheads and Buffalo Tom and you guys and
Mm.
all these different like post-punk and bands that sounded like Creedence Clearwater Revival. At the same time, you had you guys doing something completely different. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about that scene in particular?
Well, the 80s were interesting for sure. I mean, you have a whole post-punk culture coming out of, with so many different influences coming from everywhere. Yeah, and a lot of it's centered in the idea of doing it yourself,
Yes.
the DIY. So that was kind of the made for a city like Boston that's so small, that's like a perfect setting for that
Yes.
environment and for that time. You've got a lot of like loft space. You've got a lot of basement clubs and bars and places where bands could practice and rehearse. And you have music schools. So there was the environment in art schools, so in film schools and dance schools and all kinds of different ideas flowing. And the scene was pretty interesting because there was just you could go out pretty much any night of the week and hear something, and most of it was original music, if not some obscure cover of
Yes.
of something you'd never heard of.
And
Um,
did you
so
get
yeah,
yeah. Did you guys play with
that
all
was the
these
environment.
bands like Bullet La Volta or were there separate scenes for like have yeah.
All the bands you mentioned, I've seen them, and we've played on the same stages, the same bars, and we've been on the same black and white Xeroxed, tour poster that was posted on the telephone pole. You know, in the 80s, I was in a band called Three Colors.
Yes.
And Mark had his band called Sandman, which was an original band of his, which then kind of lasted for a while. And that's when I met Mark. in Boston playing in a basement bar called the Rat. And then he met up with David and Billy and Jimmy, and they started forming Treat Her Right
Hmm.
in the 80s, which was a complete throwback to a whole other, style of making
Yep.
music and style of music in itself. It was rootsy. It had, Mark played this basically he played a bass through a guitar with an octaver and only
Okay.
played the two strings, the E string and the A string, and limited his bass playing to the very simplistic, most necessary utilitarian notes. But it sounded so wonderful because it was coming through a big SVT
Right.
amplifier. So you have that, and then you have Billy on a cocktail drum, which is a drum that you stand behind
Yep.
and you kick the bottom of it, and the head come, the
Hmm.
hammer comes up and hits the bottom of the head. Um, the beater, I should say, not the hammer. Sorry, drummers, don't send emails. Um, so Jimmy Fitting on harmonica, which he sounded like a freight train, coming through an amplifier, and then Dave Champagne on slide guitar, and it was like, what is this? You're listening to it live in a small room. It just feels and sounds so good. And these guys had these songs that they were coming up with, and it was incredible. So that was, I mean, that was one vibe, but there was several other, the city itself had so many different, great musicians and great bands all going at the same time, in different people, it was the same crowd though,
Hmm.
basically. Everyone was open to whatever was happening.
And you played in this band before while Mark was in Treat Her Right, and I've never listened to your band. I have to listen to it. But was it a post-punk band? I mean, you played sax, of course. Was
You can
it?
see the poster right here, right? You see
Yeah,
that? Those three
yeah,
dots? That's
yes,
three colors.
three colors. Yeah.
It's five guys in our 20s, looking to hang out together and make some music. It was very poppy,
Hmm.
and it kind of came out of that, the jam kind of a vibe,
Right.
you
Oh,
know,
really? Kind of mod thing.
mod in some ways, but also heavily influenced by the Elvis Costello, early
Hmm.
Elvis Costello, and the attractions and that sort of a take, and some ska elements, um, and it was poppy though, in a kind of almost borderline new wave in a weird way, with the
Right.
synthesizers,
So when you
and
guys
very cracking snare.
so when you
Go
guys
ahead.
formed Morphine in the end of the 80s, I mean, it was I mean, I've seen Morphine live many times. I used to live in the US, and it was such a different,
Okay.
yeah, it was amazing, man. I mean, I lived in the West Coast. It was such a different band even for the time. I mean, grunge was picking up. Everyone was playing a really hard stuff, and all the bands from Seattle, and then you guys come. I mean, did you ever were you ever like conscious of how weird it was for a band like you guys to have the success you had?
Well, no, because not at all. I don't think. Maybe the first couple of gigs, it might have been like, if we're playing the middle slot of two really loud guitar bands, and we look at each other going, wow. Well, I was just looking at myself, because I don't think Mark ever doubted it himself ever. So I was thinking to myself, how are we going to get over with this crowd? This is, we have a saxophone, and at that time a bass with one string,
Yeah.
and drums. This is going to be interesting. But you know what? The crowd in the city of Boston, the people, the fans were so appreciative and welcoming right from the start. They're very supportive, and they wanted you to succeed. It wasn't that leftover attitude from the 70s of
Yeah.
early pop, whatever, where you're spitting at the audience,
Yes.
spitting at the crowd. There was a lot of support. So we were encouraged to try things, and in many ways, I think our sound helped really kind of balance the evening, because you have So we would say we have it's like a palate cleanser, like the sorbet between two
Yes.
meals, two courses.
It's funny because I lived in the US in the 90s, and the image we have of the 90s rock scene in the US is mostly these Seattle bands and heavy bands, but it was also pretty eclectic. I mean, you had Ween, you had Pavement, you had all these
Yeah,
weird kind of off angular bands, you know. It wasn't just really heavy noise bands.
exactly. And like yeah, I mean the audiences were open to it, There wasn't you didn't have a phone, You had to do
Yes.
something, you know. True. I mean, it's like
I
if you had
know.
an interest in seeing what happens, you have to go see it for
Yes,
yourself.
yes. It changed
Yeah.
completely today, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the whole mystery of like if you had a record of a band that you loved and you were looking to this record and you trying to get as much out of this as you could, where did this happen? Who are the people that made it? Who are the producers? What was the environment like? The music would pulls you into that kind of mystery of like, how was this created? And and you say, oh, well, I know, I'll just Google it. And you probably get a drone shot of the
Yes.
studio and that goes down the singer's nose or something. I don't know, but but now, I mean, in the old days when we were young, you
Yeah.
had to get out there
Yeah.
and show up with a ticket, and until they hit the stage, you had no idea what to expect.
It seemed to me that you guys had a lot of creative freedom doing your records, right? Was there any pressure from record companies to do this or do that? Because I mean, the records are so different from what was coming out. Was so they're so brilliant.
No, we never really were uh, interfered with creatively up until the very last record making of the night, and it wasn't so much an interference as it was a an opinion that was something we were had to consider
Hmm.
that was coming from DreamWorks. And when we would send them certain takes of things, they would send it back, with a they don't hear a hit. It's the old I don't hear a hit thing.
Yes.
Or had wanted us to go, and so we often would have to go back in and try something and rework it but up to that point, and for the, for I have to say, I think that added, kind of pressure may have made us work harder. Um, I don't know, maybe, but up until that point, we didn't have to listen to anybody except for ourselves, which was incredibly freeing
Yes.
and wonderful time in my life, actually,
Yes.
because it's
Yes.
maybe the only time in my life that's ever happened. As
And
you can
can you?
hear my dog in the background.
I have dogs too. So, can you tell me just a little bit? We're almost in the end about the concerts here in Brazil. I mean, what are you guys preparing? Is it going to be a best of or new stuff too?
Well, we'll have some new stuff. We'll have some old stuff. We have a new drummer who's phenomenal.
Cool.
Mr. Tom Airy will be joining us on drums, and he has really brought in a whole new energy to the band. He came in knowing the old stuff like he was there making it, and he brings both drums playing and Billy's playing and integrates that, but is also bringing his own thing to it. So it's I'm really looking forward to coming. We are as well, and we can hardly wait to meet up with our Brazilian family who we miss very much.
It'll be great. Dana, thank you very much for
I'm
this,
looking
man.
forward to. I hope to see you there, Andre.
For sure, I'll be there in
Please
every
come by
show.
and say hello.
I will. I
All
will.
right.
Thank you very much for this, man. See you in
Thank
São
you,
Paulo.
sir.
See
I
you.
want to read all your books.
Oh, okay. I'll give you some of the books.
How's the Slash book?
The Slash book is fun. Is actually pretty funny. I mean, his life is pretty amazing. Like his mom
Is it?
used to work with David Bowie. He has an amazing life, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really great. So, man, thank you very much for this. I know you have other interviews, so I'll see you in Brazil.
Pleasure. We'll see you there, Andre. Be
Thanks a lot,
good.
man. See you soon.